Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me just return back to the definition. I think if you have a good understanding of definition, you could understand better the rest. It's about the Sharia, the concept you mentioned, Sheikh Shouqi, in your first intervention. You mentioned the two verses. ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها سورة الجاثية, and the other verse لكل جعلنا منكم شرعة ومنهاجا. If I've understood well what you said, the Sharia is a general concept common of all the prophets, all the tradition, and it's the path that allow us to purify ourselves. And the Sharia is the practical aspect. So why لكل جعلنا منكم شرعة ومنهاجا, for every nation every nation had its proper legislation, if I could translate that like that. My question is why, once again, that was mentioned this morning, but I would like to repeat the question. Why the word in the verse is mentioned undefined, يعني nakira? If it's a common thing for all the prophets, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala don't say ثم جعلناك على الشريعة, and the word is mentioned as nakira and as relative, يعني مضاف إلى it's my question. The first question, sorry. The second one is about the definition. Dr. Ghali highlighted the fact that this word, historically speaking, has had many senses, and I would like to mention an article of Dr. Shanqiti. Unfortunately, it isn't here. He wrote a paper called تطبيق الشريعة في المجتمعات الحرة, the application of Sharia in the free societies, and he mentioned the development of the concept in a historically perspective. He mentioned the fact, for example, that Tabari, one of the first tafasir, for him, Sharia is all the religion. I would like just to highlight that, to say that the definition now you gave, and it's the same thing that Professor Tariq Ramadan mentioned about the Sharia is the path, the way you have perhaps to have a context background about definition, because it's our it's in certain way an answer to those parts of our community who reduce Sharia to just legal aspect. And what I would like to say by that we have to keep in mind that this word have many definition, historically speaking, and perhaps in another time we would adopt another definition depending on the context in which we live.
My question is from the first lecture that we had this morning. Basically, you gave us an example about how the Sahaba applied fiqh in a very rich context, and often the sort of rulings that they gave were not clearly based on textual sources. And part of the reason why is because they had really good understanding of Maqasid, or the purpose behind things. So I guess my question was, they were very close to the original source. So they grew, they learned the revelation from the Prophet, and they watched the Prophet, and they grew up with the Prophet. So of course, their understanding and their application will be different to our understanding 1400 years later. So how do we make sure that if Islamic rulings are derived from the Maqasid sort of pathway or in that way, then how do we make sure that it's not too speculative or too liberal, I suppose? Yeah.
Continuing with issue on terminology, the field of Islamic studies, the terminology in the field of Islamic studies is mostly dominated by Western scholars and their definitions, the Western discourse. And well, yeah, that's the problem. And today in the morning during sessions, we heard several times that it's not quite correct translation, or not correct meaning. How this situation can be changed, in your view? What are the ways to change that?
My question is coming off of something that Dr. Khatib said in his talk. He said that fiqh entails necessarily, it used to, the definition of fiqh, or even it still does, entails ethics, right? And so my question is, after you said that, I started to think about what does it mean when we dissect ethics from fiqh? And what are the possibilities, and what could that do to us? Are we committing an injustice to our own tradition by taking ethics out of fiqh? Are we trying to fit our understanding of, because if ethics is what ought one to do, and fiqh is similar in that, so it's what ought one to do in light of the divine will, are we trying to fit our understanding of what ought one to do in a foreign concept? And then finally, would we be rendering fiqh meaningless, meaning that's just a set of rules?
My question to you is, you provide an explanation which is on very intellectually high level to very relevant issues. But the problem is, I'm from Belgium. The committee of mosques are predominantly old men. The institutions that provide information about Islam are predominantly older men that are not born in Belgium. Then you see like there are mosques that are being funded by women. They are leading prayer, but they're getting a lot of criticism. Then we have like a younger generation in Belgium that is thinking about big challenges like a halal slaughter that is now being discussed in Belgium as going to be forbidden. And the younger generation is like, okay, why can't we slaughter animal if they are like intoxicated? Is that really a big core issue for Islam? So like my question is, I want to have from you guys like practical tools I can take with me in my community, in my society, where I can ask the right question to the establishment and saying like, try to include us in the conversation about Islam, taking our common morality, as Rima said, because we have a different common morality than the leading establishment of the Belgian Muslim community. And we want to take part of that conversation, but how can we explain to them that we want to be part of that conversation and like explain it in a way that is reasonable to them and also backed up by, I think, Islamic science? Or so that's the practical tool I really would like to get from this.
The question maybe, or the comment is gonna join what Sister Elena said about patriarchal discourse. And I have another example similar to women in the mosque. Of Assia Jabbar is an Algerian author who writes in French. The novel Loin de Médine, بعيدا عن المدينة, far from Medina. And in that novel, she was talking about women's role in Medina, and they had done great. They had a great role in in Medina after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, and then they were not mentioned. They just fade away. Okay, so.
We had like two parts of a question. I know it's half a second, but I'll go really fast. The first part was...
it's just a way to trick and say
It's two parts to one question. But one was just in terms of women's roles. Dr. Tariq Ramadan was talking about women in usul al-fiqh, like there's not a lot of fiqh scholars. And so when we go back to looking at benefit, when we were talking about like the benefit, for example, of women in mosque spaces, we have like narrations of Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu, who were on like the back of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so they were in the mosque, like that was part of the culture, was that like the children were there, that they were not like kind of shunned out. So when did when did the benefit become kind of focused more on, well, like children need to be taken care of outside of this space, whereas like the mosque should be a community. And then I won't ask the second question because that was kind of cheating. It was part of this, but it's cheating, so I have a sense of justice.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we have still half an hour, so inshallah I will try to be brief, and some questions were addressed to me immediately, and the issue of the woman came back again and again. I just recently finished a book together with my wife, so it's not a patriarchal book, yeah. And it's about women in Islam from an Islamic perspective, and one of the chapters is about the prayer in the mosque, prayer of the woman in the mosque. I think we may come to similar conclusions with the book that was mentioned. I did not read the book, but my problem is with the methodology. What is more interesting for me is the methodology and not the outcome. And there is one fact that we have to acknowledge, and that is that there are several ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that the prayer of the woman is better in her house than her prayer in the mosque. So this is a fact. So saying that this big number of hadith, we just throw them away because it's a patriarchal logics where the man just invited a bunch of stories and a bunch of texts just to dominate women, etc. This is for me this is problematic because this opens the gate to
Also for your woman is problematic.
Also for my wife, alhamdulillah. So it's not. Yeah, this is in usul fiqh, in usul fiqh, when the Prophet ﷺ says something, and it's a general statement, and there is no qarina, there is no evidence that this is a specific issue, then, al-amr, this is a rule in usul fiqh, al-amr yaqtadi al-wujub, wal-nahi yaqtadi tahrim, etc. So here, there is no amr or no nahi, there is only a recommendation. So it means that it's recommended for the woman to pray at home. This is general meaning, but I said, we may come to similar conclusions of the author of the book that was mentioned, because our conclusion in the book is that, if we look at the Maqasid, if we look at the illah and the hikmah, the wisdom behind the prayer in the mosque, we see that the wisdom that the mosque is a space where, that favoritize, that improves the sphere, the atmosphere of khushu', of devotion, and of recueillement. I don't speak French. Anyhow, that improves, the state of khushu'. There are several benefits, and there is a rule also in usul fiqh that says that if there is something that is called qiyas al-ma'na, which means that if something, for example, the Quran says في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها بالغدو والآصال رجال. So he talks about man. But here, we have a ruling in usul fiqh that says if we have two things, and this is called القياس بنفي الفارق, which means that there is no difference between them, the two, in the ruling. There is no difference between masculinity and femininity. That's a difference that could be influencing the statement of the ruling. Then there is the differentiation cannot be made. And here it's the case. So it means that we have a text, and my problem is that we should acknowledge that there is a text, And if you want to dig, and if you want to be coherent, for example, with the Maqasid, be coherent with the objectives of khushu', be coherent with the fact also that at the time of the Prophet, the women, they went to all the prayers from Fajr till Isha. And this continued after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And so here, to be coherent with all of this, and also the Prophet ﷺ, when he was saying about the importance of the prayer and the mosque, he was addressing men and women. So we have here in appearance two contradicting rulings. A text that's saying something, but rulings, women that are going to the mosque, texts that are inciting for going to the mosques, etc., that seems to be contradictory. What is the solution here in Usul Fiqh? The solution is to find a way to reconcile, is to dig into the illah, etc., and to see how we can understand both principles, how we can understand the text. Because if you say the solution is just to throw away the text and to say it's just a construction or a lie or man just invented this, then you can say this about any text you want. You can say it about the whole Sunnah. So if something you don't like it, then you just say no, it's just a historical construction, etc. So this is one issue. Another issue is, of course, the sister talked about the fact, I think the patriarchal society historically, and that the women were engaged socially at the time of the Prophet, etc., and then their efforts were dismissed. This is true. But, the Islamic civilization emerged in a global reality where misogyny and patriarchy was the rule. So this is the reality, and the scholars, when they established the rulings, they were the products also of their time. So they were within this global reality where woman was disregarded and was seen as an inferior being, and this has influenced even the Islamic scholars. Even though Islam came with the whole process to liberate women from this historical reality, but the reality was, more heavier than in this case. And Malik bin Nabi, he says about the political Islamic political thought historically, he said that Islam came with principles and a lot of Islamic principles, or a lot of principles of the society were a product of the Islamic principles. While talking about the political issue, it's the opposite. The political thought was a product. The Islamic political thought was a product of the political reality, and not the opposite. So here, in some issues, the reality was too heavy and too strong in order to be able for the scholars to continue this process, which the revelation came with. But I think we should look and read these things in their historical context. So today we see at some rulings in Islam, this is misogyny, this is patriarchy, etc. Yeah, it's true. With our lens, it is. But if we would, them in their time, we would not have see this. We will not, because we would have been the product of that period, and we will, like, for example, today, it's for sure we are influenced by our reality, and we are assuming things to be right, and maybe the next generations will see that we are mistaking. Who told you the scholars are not doing that? I think that there is work that has been done on that issue.
Yes, just finish the book. What do you want? With his wife.
Because when he told Prophet ﷺ told Fatima bint Qais, what was her answer? When he told her to go back to her husband, what was her answer? Is your statement a divine, a recommendation, or just a personal recommendation? There are rules for this. It's a long story. But the issue here is there is the text, and if you dig into the text, you can come to some conclusions, and you can come to situations where the woman, it's better for her to, but this is the same thing for men. In some cases, it's better for him to pray, and we have a lot of cases in the Sunnah also where for men, it's better to pray at home than to pray in the mosque. So the issue here is, like I said, the issue of methodology. And you know, the hadith comes for several turuq. You know, turuq is, there are so many turuqs of the hadith, you know. Some of them are weak, some of them are sahih li ghayrihi, etc. So yeah, this work has been done.
Did you ask about his opinion?
Who?
Did you consult with
Yes.
him about this?
Yes. And he, no, he's reading the book right now, actually.
So no worries.
There was another question about how we can know that maqasid are, I think, are right and are not just
Methodology for deducing maqasid.
Yes.
Between consistent methodology and just
yes.
being
Actually,
liberal.
this issue has been debated since Shatibi, and before Shatibi we had Masalik al-Illa, which is the methodology of deducing the illa, the rational, and actually Shatibi continued this logic because the deduction of the rational is similar than the deduction of the maqasid, because rational at the end of the day is just a very partial objective, while maqasid are overall objectives. So we have this debate, and we have people talking about the rulings, but here you said that how can you know that the maqasid are not, I don't know how you formulate it, are not just
So I was saying that the Sahaba, when they applied the ruling, they had a more direct access to the source. So
yes, but you said like, how can you know that maqasid is not something liberal or misused? Yeah, and actually to know what maqasid actually, according to all the scholars of maqasid, is something that can only come from the text. It does not come like this. It does not come like somebody is, just expressing his feelings or expressing his emotions, etc. It's something that is based on the text, and so maqasid are identified from a big number of texts. So the induction of the text, this is one of the main methodologies to come to maqasid. There are no contradiction in text. There are no contradiction in text. Can you give me an example of a contradiction in text? You cannot find one example. The apparent contradiction, okay, but there is no real contradiction. This is impossible. A real contradiction in text is just impossible. If there is a contradiction, it means that one of the two is not a text, or the contradiction is your not authentic. It's not a text. It means it's not authentic text. Or your understanding of the contradiction is in the way you understand it. But no, there is no real contradiction in text. But the maqasid does not come from one single text. It's an induction of a big number of texts. There is no changeable in the text.
Oh yes.
Can you give me one example?
There are so many changeable things.
Can you give me an example?
There has been argument with regard to.
Yeah, but is there a concrete example of something? What is changeable is the application. What is changeable is your understanding may change, may evolve. Your application may change, but there is no established principles in the text that's changed. The application can change. Your understanding can change, but the principle as a principle from the text.
We have 15 minutes.
Okay. So I'll just leave it here.
Did you finish the
regarding the question of terminology, I think this issue is very problematic because of many reasons, not just one. The first reason is the language itself. When you transfer from language to another, of course there are differences, and it's not they are not the same. Even we have this problem with the translation of the Quranic text, the Sunnah, and even the Islamic tradition itself. So, and this, I think, this problem will not end up, in my opinion. We will keep discussion this issue. Number two, the world view. When we transfer from language to another, so we are talking about not a matter of language only, but we are talking about the conceptions, the perceptions, and the world view that and the cultural implications too. Number 3, the ideology. So if we are talking about the Western scholarship on Islamic studies, so especially Oriental scholarship, so there are a lot of critiques regarding this issue because of the colonization and because of other elements were studied by many scholars from Edward Said till Wa'il Hallaq. Regarding to the second question, the relationship between fiqh and ethics, I think we have to define the concept of ethics. When I talk about ethics, I mean 3 elements. Number 1, the sources that give us answers to the essential questions. What is right and what is wrong, and how we know this is right and this is wrong. These main questions or essential questions, so we have to answer them based on sources. So what are your sources to answer these questions? My sources are the Quranic text or the revelation, Quran and Sunnah. So the revelation. So for the secularists, they have, their answer will be, their source is the rational, the reason, the human reason. And for maybe other religious traditions, their answer will be different, of course, you know. And even for the secularists, we have different answers, not just one. If we are talking about the Kantianism theory, so it's different from the consequentialism or from other, or natural law or contractualism, or, you know. So we have different answers. For us as Muslims, so our answers, the sources are revelation and reason at the same time. To avoid this dichotomy, actually this Greek dichotomy between reason and revelation. This is not a part of the Islamic culture, but it was imported by the Greek philosophy at the very early stage in Islamic tradition. So ethics contain 3 components. Number 1, the sources. Number 2, norms, the norms. Number 3, the methodology that help you to derive norms from the sources. So when we talk about ethics, when I talk about ethics, I mean these 3 elements. So now, if we will go with these 3 elements to the Usul al-Fiqh, Islamic legal theory, and Islamic jurisprudence fiqh, we will find all these 3 elements, you know, because Usul al-Fiqh and Maqasid at the same time are providing us with the sources, which now it's called in the moral philosophy meta-ethics, which focuses on the sources and the answers of the essential questions. And at the same time, with Usul Fiqh provides us with the methodology that can help us to derive norms from the sources. And Islamic jurisprudence is just the applications of this process that address too many cases, specific cases. So you can call Islamic ethics, Islamic jurisprudence as applied ethics. Yeah. So in my for my presentation, at least, it's not like this. So and I'm criticizing this anyway. So and this is why I mentioned many critical comments on the approaches that I mentioned. You know, to avoid this dichotomy, which is a part of the modernity, because we cannot talk about ethics out of Islamic jurisprudence and out of the Islamic studies in general. But now I think, is it necessary to establish a new independent discipline which is called ethics? Yes, I think. And this is what we are trying to do, but not separated from the Islamic disciplines, or the Islamic branches of knowledge, but integrated with them and to cross the borders between these Islamic fields, you know? So regarding to the third issue, that, okay, about the question of Maqasid and who has the right to use Maqasid today. I think, again, we have to define the concept of Maqasid as I did with ethics now, to understand each other. When I talk about Maqasid, or we talk about Maqasid in general, so we are talking about two types of Maqasid. Number one is Maqasid Shari', so the objectives of lawgiver, of God, you know. And the number two, Maqasid al-Mukallafin, the objectives of people themselves. So we have two types of Maqasid. Now, the Maqasid itself has three meanings. Number one, we use Maqasid in the sense of the meaning. What do you mean? So what's your maqsad, you know? So the meaning itself. Number two, Maqasid in the sense of qasd, the intention. Did you intend this or not? So to do something or specific action intentionally. So this is the second meaning of Maqasid. The third meaning, that the objective, al-ghaya, al-hikmah, the hikmah, the wisdom behind this speech or this order or this obligation. What's the purpose at the end of the process? So we have these two types and these three meanings. Now, regarding to the Maqasid al-Shari', the first type of Maqasid, nobody can talk about this unless he is qualified and studied the Quranic discourse and the revelation and the Islamic tradition at the same time. Because we cannot borrow the Salafi approach and go directly to the text without the history of the understanding, you know? So I'm not the first one to tackle the text directly, regardless what happened during the history. And even this is not acceptable if you do any research in any field. First of all, you have to do state affairs, you know, the research, the status of research area. So this is what you have to do when you study or address Maqasid. And we are talking about here about Maqasid Shari'. The Maqasid Shari' you only know by studying the text, the revelation, and the interpretation, the tradition that was built on the text during the history. If we are talking about Maqasid al-Mukallafin, the second type of Maqasid, so most of this type of Maqasid, it's your task. It's our task to do this, because you cannot judge any action, any human action, without looking at the Maqasid al-Mukallafin, the intention, the responsibility, the objectives, and why did you do this, and for what? You know, did you do it intentionally or not? So because these are essential elements to judge any human action. And who is going to judge your action? Yourself, because I have no idea about your intention and your choices and your objectives, unless it was connected with harm somebody else. in this regard will go to the law, not to Islamic jurisprudence. If there is a connection with the rights of others, you know? So this level is a task of law, not, and even Muslim jurists can judge this in general, but he cannot judge actions connected with rights of people, other people, because in this case you have to go to the judge, not to the Muslim jurist. I will stop here. Yeah. Okay, just one sentence. Okay, now we have 2 types and 3 meanings. 2 types of maqasid and 3 meanings of maqasid. Now, the higher objective of Sharia, that to تطابق, conformity, confirm, تطابق.
To make it identical.
To confirm, conformity? Conform. So the higher objective of Sharia to conform between مقاصد المكلف and مقاصد الشارع. To conform between your objectives and to do your actions in the light of the objectives that was intended by God. This is the highest objective of Sharia. إيقاع مقاصد المكلفين على وفق مقاصد الشارع. And this is why Shatibi mentioned this very essential point many times. And this is the purpose in general. You know, to know the intended meaning by God and to do your actions based on the intended meaning by God. And to make your intentions conform with the objectives of God. Alhamdulillah.